Okay, so it's just so wonderful to see you all here today. I'm very excited about what we're going to do this evening. I'm going to give you a quick overview of what we're doing. My name is Jordan Garcia. I work at the American Friends Service Committee, and tonight's Spotlight On is our Spotlight Ons are the last Tuesday of the month, where we try to really go deep on one topic and really kind of sink our teeth into it, and work on it. So we've done a range of things. We've done climate justice, reproductive justice, whatever, how it intersects with immigration. And today members really wanted to sink teeth into the IGSA House Bill 23-1100. And do some background on it. So we're going to hear from Gabriella first and have some background. And then Myra's going to tell us about the bill and what it does specifically. And then we're going to have Myra also share with us a little bit of strategy about what do we want to do to move forward. And then we are going to do a little bit of phone banking. We are going to stay online together and kind of do a phone zap and share in real time some calls that we're going to make to folks in the specific districts that we need specific votes from specific senators. So I'm pretty excited. I think it'll be great. I'm going to turn it over to Gabriella to go first and kind of give us some context and background on the PoliMigra, the police and migration together, and what we've been doing the last few years in the immigrant rights movement to fight at that intersection. Okay, Gabrielle.
Great. Jordan, can you make it so that I can share my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe. Hold up. I have to ask the iPad to do it. Okay.
Hang on, I just lost what I had. Okay. I was trying to share the whole screen. Okay. Hang on one second. So while I'm setting this up to share my screen, I want to just say that this is a really important bill. And this bill is not a bill that comes in isolation. It's a bill that comes from years and years of work that have been led in many ways by undocumented folks and allies joining them in that fight. Colorado in 2006 was one of the most anti-immigrant states in the country. We passed a Show Me Your Papers bill that actually preceded Arizona. It was along with Georgia in passing a bill that required local law enforcement to racially profile. And then we have since then been working, folks have been working across the state. And again, the leadership of undocumented folks standing up and saying this is not okay has made a huge shift. So I wanted to, okay, so I can share my screen. Is that right, Jordan? Okay, here we go. All right, let me do this. I'm gonna see if you all can read it. There's kind of a lot. Okay, can you guys read this? Can you see history of resistance, design history of resistance slide? Okay. Y quiero chequear si todos los que han entrado están bien con la interpretación. Si alguien no está bien, por favor, ponga un comentario en el chat y le ayudamos. Okay. So I'll start with a little bit of background. As I mentioned, in 2006, while there were over almost 150,000 people marching to stand up against horrific federal bills that actually are now being pushed at the state level in places like Florida that would criminalize people for simply having undocumented folks in their car transporting people. There were 150 people in Denver in the streets. While we were in the streets, the Colorado legislature was in the midst of a special session where over a dozen anti-immigrant bills were passed. And included in that was the Show Me SB 90, which is Colorado's Show Me Your Papers law that, like I said, codified racial profiling and required local law enforcement to act as immigration agents. And so since that time, we've been fighting back and pushing back. And when I say we, I say that this is on with the leadership of directly impacted folks and many amazing leaders and organizers and organizations throughout the state. Additionally, what was happening, we saw militarized mass workplace raids that targeted Swift meatpacking plants, including one in Greeley. And there were protest directions that erupted. Those raids continued through 2011. In December 2009, Colorado reaches its peak of ICE detainer requests during SB 90, where there were over 9,000 detainers issued in Colorado. And there was an expansion. Another really critical piece that's really problematic was expansion of the Geo-Detention Center from 500 to 1,500 beds. Now, these things were not happening without protest and people raising their voices. Colorado People's COPA was working to fight that in Aurora, and it wasn't successful, but they raised awareness around it. And then in 2010, AFSC and CERC sat down to create a legal and statutory analysis of Colorado laws, as well as begin to work with partners to study the impacts of the 2000 laws on community. And this is where community came together from across the state, talked about their values, and developed a what we called Melt the Ice convening, where folks came together and said, these are our values. We want to be welcoming community. We want to shift this state, and have all people's contributions valued, and we don't want to see people further criminalized, and those who have been criminalized should not be excluded from our society. And so that led to, and the first goal along that was overturning SB 90. And then in the spring of 2020, the End Unjust Enforcement campaign began at CERC, and this was to build a 4-year strategy to push back on ICE detainers. The first phase was repeal SB 90. Second phase, get local level detainer reform. Third phase, pass statewide law to prohibit immigration detainers without a warrant. And we have been successful. Again, when I say we, I am speaking about the many, many immigrants and organizations and allies that have been involved in this. And again, we had this, sorry, I misspoke. I spoke about the Melt the Ice. That was actually in 2012. And that's when the Unite Colorado came together. And then we started CERC with partner organizations across the state, launched the hotline incident. And that was a way that we began documenting and being able to show the strategies, show the impacts of these laws. And then we were able, CERC members met with all 64 sheriffs across the state to discuss the impacts of SB 90. And we were able in 2013, again, we in the broad sense, to pass the Community and Law Enforcement Trust Act. And Colorado became the first state to repeal their Show Me Your Papers law. And the county sheriffs of Colorado endorsed and co-authored this repeal with CERC and leaders across the state. And then from April to July of 2014, there was ACLU sent letters to the Colorado sheriffs basically telling them that detainers are illegal and they needed to stop engaging in that. And again, there was a lot of meetings with sheriffs where directly impacted folks were speaking with sheriffs and telling them these impacts. And then because of the combined efforts of the ACLU and CERC, advocacy, all 64 sheriffs in Colorado voluntarily stopped honoring ICE holds. This was huge. We were the first state in the country to have that happen. And then in 2015, the coalition passed impact bill that made it illegal to honor ICE holds without a federal warrant signed by a US magistrate. And then in 2017, after over a year and a half of work with city and sheriffs, passed the Denver City Council passes the Public Safety Priorities Act, and this further separates Denver city and county laws from ICE enforcement. And then in 2017, CERC runs and passes the Bonds Surety Protection Act, and that bill repeals one of the last remnants of the state show me your papers law that required that sheriffs discourage people from posting bond if they had immigration detainer requests. So you can see over the years, all of these pieces of legislation build on each other. Then in 2019, HB 1123, a compromise bill passes. Then it's an act that prohibits law enforcement officers from arresting or detaining an individual solely on the basis of civil immigration detainer. Then in 2021, we have the creation of a statewide universal representation fund, and this builds on the one that also came out in 2017 out of the city of Denver. Now that fund is far from being fully funded, but it was a step. It's a step in the right direction of working for universal representation for anyone who is detained. So then now here we are in 2023. Where we have the ISG bill to stop these relationships, stop intergovernmental association agreements with local governments and ICE. And this is the next rung in trying to unravel this marriage and collusion between local law enforcement and ICE and local governments and ICE. And Colorado has, as you can see from this history, has gone from being one of the most anti-immigrant states to having some of the best policies. And yet we know those best policies are still far from where we need to be. And so this current bill takes us another step in the way. And we're building on the shoulders of undocumented immigrants that have been in the lead. And one thing I didn't mention here was also the passage of driver's licenses for all. And that was a campaign that was fully spearheaded by undocumented immigrants. And it was another way of cutting the legs out of local law enforcement, getting people into detention and deportation proceedings. So I hope that was a lot, I know, but it's a lot because so many people have done so much work in the state. And this is why we all need to step up and work to pass this bill so that we can build on what's happening. And we can also fight against we can set the standard for positive things, because we're seeing really scary things coming out in certain states, particularly in Florida. And we need Colorado to step up, not only for Coloradans, but for the country, to say it's not okay to be passing bills that spew hate and division and devastation in communities that have incredible resilience, but shouldn't have to rely on that resilience. So I want to hand it back over and say it's exciting to be here tonight with all of you, because we're here to make further history, to make Colorado turn the page against hatred and corporations profiting out of destroying and tearing families apart, to instead creating real community and change that we need.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gabriella. Stop sharing your screen. Great. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions about some of the context before we have Myra tell us about the bill? All right. Awesome. Myra, you want to take us to today?
Yes. First, I just want to say thank you to all who joined tonight. And I don't have a cool presentation like Gabriella, but that's okay. So the bill we're here to talk about today is House Bill 23-1100. This bill has two components to it. The first part is it would prohibit the state from facilitating, selling, or leasing land to new private detention centers in the state. And the second part is really targeting Intergovernmental Service Agreements, or IGSAs. It would require current contracts to be terminated by January 1st, 2024, and also would prohibit the renewal of these contracts or coming into a new contract if you currently don't have one. So that's the bill, pretty short, sweet, and simple. So I'll stop there and see if folks have any questions.
I don't have so much a question, so I'll give people a second in case you do have a question. I don't have so much a question as I have a shout out or a recognition or a high five for the folks at COPA and the folks at Together Colorado who are really pushing this baby forward, and maybe a special high five for Angelica for doing so much to make to clear the path before moving on to her next gig. But just recognizing that like this is like an awesome collaboration between organizations that are really have our eyes on the prize. Okay, any questions from Myra before she talks to us about strategy? All right.
Yo tengo un comentario.
Sí, sí, sí.
Porque la mayoría de la gente que trabajamos en el pasado para quitar estas conexiones, sabemos más o menos cómo se trata el contexto de que no queremos que el gobierno vuelva a hacer que los contratos estén en cárceles o que cárceles regulares ofrezcan espacios también para inmigración. Pero tal vez si Mayra quiere hablar más el contexto, el por qué se está queriendo que no se implemente este acuerdo de prestar o rentar o vender espacios en las cárceles regulares cuando no hay espacios en los centros de inmigración. ¿Por qué necesitamos seguir rompiendo estas brechas de espacios rentables para más inmigrantes?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Jeanette. Gracias por tu comentario, Jeanette. Mi español no lo hablo muy bien, so voy a contestar en inglés.
Está bien, está la interpretación.
Yeah, so I think when we talk about these contracts, it's important to know that ICE does not have limited capacity and they don't have all the resources people think they do. They do rely heavy on collaboration with state and county local jails. So one, by terminating and ending these contracts in the state, we're kind of chopping part of ICE's machine, one of like their arms that they have, which then would rely on them to focus heavily on the use of private detention centers. That's where we get into a kind of double sword argument because we don't want to advocate for GEO and their center, but also understanding that undocumented people should, the folks that are being detained are mainly there as they're navigating their immigration process, and they should be able to do that in community at home with their family. We know they have family and resources out there that can be able to help them better. And we know that immigrants will show up to their court hearings as well. The other part is just helping to kind of put an end to some of these private detention centers that we've seen across the country. The end goal would be ultimately to get GEO out of our state, but because of pending litigation, we're just going to focus on trying to prevent them from growing here. So I hope that answered your question, Jeanette.
Sí.
Great. Great.